Hello again, my name is Jason, and I'm going to be talking about Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings. This is book one of the Belgariad, and it's actually kind of the start of two series, because there's a second series that has the same characters in it that's called the Malorian, and that follows. So book one of the Belgariad, it's 5 books, and then there's another 5 books that follow that's the Malorian. What I want to start out with is kind of interesting in a couple of ways. So I read this series, and then I read the Malorian, and then I found out he had 2 more series that he had written. He likes to do things with magic stones. Just saying. His first series and his second series are not that much different from each other. I mean, yeah, there are differences and everything, but there's too much that's the same, in my opinion, in some ways. Anyway. Okay, so in Pawn of Prophecy, you start out with a creation story. So the gods got together, they created the world. Each of the gods went their own way thereafter, and each god went to his own people that worshipped him specifically. And there was one god that just kind of went off on his own, and he wasn't really interested in that kind of stuff. He was more interested in doing his own thing. And in the process, he found a stone, and he imbued it with power until the stone actually became a living soul. And it was nice and shiny and everything. And one of the other gods stole the stone, and intending it for himself. The stone did not like that, got angry, and scarred the god. Basically melted half of his body. So like half of him is all scarred, and he has one hand because the other hand that was the one that was holding the stone got burned off. Whole story there. The other thing that happened was that this god who had just kind of wanted to be left alone, this orphan stumbled onto him. And he started teaching the orphan, and he became this very powerful sorcerer, an immortal sorcerer for all intents and purposes. And this immortal sorcerer had 2 daughters. Anyway, this immortal sorcerer then went to this one king who had several sons and said, "I need you to come with me. Bring your sons." They went and snuck into the god's fortress who had stolen the stone, and they managed to liberate it. And they brought it back. The stone, though, was very particular about who should touch it. And the youngest son of this king was the one that was able to hold the stone. And so he and his line thereafter became the guardians of this stone. Of course, then we flash to the future, and we flash to a young boy named Garion, who was living on a relatively prosperous farm. He is living with his aunt, Polgara, and this bearded wanderer shows up every once in a while. They call him Mr. Wolf. He's a storyteller, and everybody enjoys his stories. There's also a smith there. His name is Dernick. He comes in later as well. But anyway, it's basically his childhood. He's growing up here in this, rather idyllic setting, not, surrounded by anything special or particular. It's just that, it's a relatively peaceful setting. Mr. Wolf then shows up again later after the boy has grown some, had some adventures there on the farm, and relates that something has been stolen. And so Garion ends up leaving with his aunt, and the smith comes along too. They don't want him to come along, but he, won't take no for an answer and comes along anyway. After which they get embroiled in quite a few things. They meet up with a man who turns out to be a spy, actually a prince, and several other things. And they get involved with the politics of the era, and it turns out that Garion's aunt Pulgara and Garion's aunt Pulgara and the Mr. Wolf, who turns out to be Belgareth, they're actually very, very powerful sorcerers. Belgareth is in fact the sorcerer who first rescued the stone. He was the orphan who was taught by the god and became the sorcerer who then, with the help of the king and his sons, rescued the stone from the god who'd stolen it. And so they were, you do end up finding out more about Garion as the story goes along, because why else would he be dragged along if he wasn't an important part of the story? So, without getting too much into details, Garion, a lot of action revolves around him. He ends up in the court of a king and saving everyone from a traitor in that court who's been scheming behind everybody's backs. But it's how he does it and what goes on, what he learns, and the various things about him, making him one of the central characters. I mean, it is told kind of. It is a third-person perspective, but it is told a lot from Garion's kind of. Garion is the center of the piece. Trying to think about how much to reveal. I think what I'm going to do is stop there as far as the story goes. And if you decide to get into it, the book Pawn of Prophecy is a good book. As I said, it seems to me that a lot of David Eddings' writings end up being similar, and maybe I'm not giving it enough credit where credit is due. That is entirely possible. I enjoyed Pawn of Prophecy. It sucked me in. It got me into the action, and even though the first part moves kind of slowly, because it's Garion growing up on a farm. There's not a lot going on. It just talks about his normal adventures of a boy living on a farm growing up. But it was still interesting. It's still a good tale, still woven well. I enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the description of the magic system in the book. All authors have their own take on magic and what it is, what it can do, and that kind of thing. And it was a very good story arc for Garion, and for finding out more about what's going on in this particular setting, and it very well sets up for the rest of the series. It pulls you in, gets you hooked on the characters, gets you wanting to know more, and then you get introduced to, you just want to move on to the next book, and the next book, and the next book. That being said, like I said, there's a lot of similarities between this series and others in the series that David Eddings has written. That's not to say that they're not enjoyable. They are. They're well written, and they're good reads. But take it for what you will. There are quite a few similarities. So, Pawn of Prophecy, great book, and I'm going to wrap it up. So, as always, like and subscribe. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down below. Also, turn on the bell to get notifications when these videos are going to be coming up. And until next time, enjoy what you're reading.